Thank you, Rustam. And thank you, friends in the Kerala Modernity Collective, for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I remember with great affection the last meeting we had when the Kerala Modernity anthology was actually discussed here. And both these occasions I really enjoyed also because these occasions seem to move away from an idea that questions of Kerala's modernity should be or can be really discussed in an atmosphere of the self-evidence of the Malayali self-relationship. So there is an attempt to break out of that, which I find really, really refreshing. In the first volume, I think it came out in the form of this investigation of what Satish called regional modernities. And here, both the books themselves adopt procedures of analysis, which actually take it away from the moods we are familiar with, within a kind of self-enclosed space of Kerala's self-consciousness, so to say. Now, Ameet's book, actually Rustam and earlier Satish have done such an excellent job that the audience has a very good idea of the overall structure of the book and some of the key arguments. So I won't be rehearsing them. And it's evident that this book stands at the intersection of several strands and several kinds of work. You have performance studies, regional studies, the post-emergency political performance in Kerala. There are many, many kinds of studies which come together in this kind of volume. Now, one of the really interesting cultural thinkers of Kerala from the 1940s, Kesari Balakrishna, once spoke about what would be the identifying marks of a Malayali culture. And he identified 2 or 3 things. One is a particular kind of hasya, which is like a satiric kind of comic sensibility. Then, what in Malayalam we inadequately call Anushtana Kalagal, which is performing arts. The preoccupation with performance is a major form of cultural expression. And then finally, Vishadatmagatam. Vishadatmagatam is, I don't think there is an English equivalent for that word. It's not pessimism. You could say that a sensibility for the sorrowful. Yeah? So these 3 things are actually seen as major markers of what he thought of as a Malayali cultural lineage. And when I read this book, I had an opportunity to read the manuscript before it became a book. And when I read it again recently, I felt that probably this book can also be read as a contemporary attempt to revisit some of these configurations. Because all these 3 elements actually come in this book in different ways in the different chapters. Yeah? Now, Ameet begins by taking up this argument that performance needs to be understood as a kind of political category. It's not an aesthetic category in a limited sense of the term, it's a political category. Here he is actually following this argument made by some thinkers that probably contemporary configurations of power are more dependent on performance rather than ideas like discipline. Now, Ameet is interested probably, at least in this book, he is interested more in that aspect of the configurations of power which produce subjects. So, what kind of subjects are produced, how are they produced within this new performative or performance configuration of power? This is one preoccupation which runs through the book. But once again, it should be clarified that the book is not about creating some kind of stable figure of the subject on which you can build up a model. He is interested much more in the interruptions, the instabilities, where the subject figures do not seem to consistently obtain or prevail. These are the kind of things that interest me. This is evident for me in 2 moves that Ameet makes in his book, in the organization of his book. One of them, as Rustam pointed out just now, is in taking up this vision, voice, and gesture as the theme thematics of the first three chapters. Now, looking at them, one may think that there is a turn to the sensorium, probably a turn to the body, etc. But that expectation is also altered, or it is deflected in some way by the introduction of the machine and the animal. There is a careful attempt to take away the discussion from grounding itself on biographies, personal histories, interiorities, and the old-style political histories. Again, it was pointed that out about political histories of theatre. So this is one interesting move in the book. The second move, which is actually a little more carefully conceived, I would say, is about the absolute centrality of the notion of gesture. Now, gesture is the title of the middle chapter, the central chapter in the book. But in some sense, one would say that the preoccupation with the gesture informs the entire analysis of all the chapters present in the book. Now, what exactly is gesture? And again, in Malayalam, the translations don't quite work because if one looks for a literal translation, one would say something like angyam or something like that. But in gesture, what's also involved is some kind of collective dimension of doing things, which we call in Malayalam by words like matta, madiri, things like that. And sometimes it is by interrupting this collective aspect of gestural repertoires that a gesture attracts visibility. Now, Ameet's own analysis is actually reliant on a very beautiful short essay that Yogamben wrote called Notes on Gesture. There he actually distinguishes gesture from two things. One is action or acting. The word in Latin is agere, and the other is making or facere. These two ideas are different from the notion of gesture, which comes from the third word, which is gerere, which actually means to carry, to support, to endure, etc. Now, when we speak about somebody's carriage, that is the idea behind it. This is why I'm also interested in this collective dimension, like in Matta, Madhuri, etc., of the gesture. Agamben is very sensitive to this. He speaks about, therefore, gesture as closely tied up with ethos. It is actually, it has a strongly collective dimension. Now, what Ameet does, in some sense, is actually to look at the history of performance in that particular period of time that he analyzes, which is mainly the 70s and a little bit even 80s, etc., etc. That period, in terms of the gestures of the radical ethos in there. This is really the impression I got when I went back to those chapters. And the works that he discusses, the cultural performances that he discusses there, these are really things which people of my generation encountered as we were growing up, like Parameswaran's poetry, K.G. Shankarapilla's Bengal, which interestingly Ameet reads in terms of a kind of implied recitational dynamic rather than in terms of the text. And of course, Nagagaddiga, all these things are actually part of that period which a whole generation lived through. Now, I had this strangely liberating and somewhat tinged with a certain kind of mournfulness when I read Ameet's chapters alongside an equally important book published a couple of years ago, compiled by P.K. Ashok Kumar, which is actually a collection of essays, letters, etc., written by one of the brightest and strongest intellectuals of the young generation in CPM at that time, Subramanian Das, who committed suicide in 1982. So that book also came out actually a couple of years ago, and reading it once again, I felt that both these works interrupt notions of a kind of a comfortable political history and recover gestures of this ethos for us. And this, I think, is actually the major challenge that Ameet's work takes on. The question that it poses is, what kind of cultural history of political performance can we write if we actually focus on or constitute as our objects these gestures in this sense that I am talking about? Yeah? And so there is a kind of slow motion performance. Ameet's reading is in that sense that subjecting the performance event that he is looking at to a rigorous low speed of review. And through that, by interrupting the comfortable logics of continuity to recover these gestures. Yeah? Now, I mentioned earlier that Ameet's interest is in cultural performance and in some sense the question of the production of subjects, even if performance is considered as a kind of category for the configuration of power. But that doesn't mean that Ameet is not interested in the more direct or more, I would say, more traditional questions of politics, like the question of the state. In fact, the earlier version of the manuscript had foregrounded the question of the state more directly. And that was one of the challenges it was posing. Now, one question which comes up, of course, is what is actually the role of the state, or how do we place this formation called the state in this contemporary formation of power? Like, we know that when paradigms like disciplinarity, for example, or governmentalization were proposed as analytical tools, the point was also to say that the state in itself does not carry the same kind of analytical purchase in new forms of power as it did earlier. But we know that there is at least an apparent return of the figure of the state much more strongly than ever before. Even as the autonomy of the state formations are increasingly undermined by other kinds of interests, you get a kind of return of at least the sovereign gesture of statehood in contemporary times. Now, is there a kind of connection between this and this particular form of power that Ameet is taking on as his historical context, that is performance as a configuration of power? Now, the last point I want to make is about the stress that Ameet places on the question of exposure. Now, we know that after Hannah Arendt, we know that politics is actually primarily and essentially a space of exposure. So the question of the gesture itself needs to be understood in the light of that. Now, Ameet's analysis, I felt, extend the lesson of Arendt productively by posing the question of the collective. This comes up in Orient, but you could say that it actually appears repeatedly in the other instances as well. The collective itself is placed as a question within this domain of exposure. Whether it is solidarities or other forms of collectivity, they need to be rethought in terms of this political space of exposure. So, this gives an additional salience to, or additional significance to the idea of performance as an analytical tool. But one aspect of the centrality of performance in political lives now, as was earlier indicated in the first half of this discussion, the earlier session, is a kind of deep destabilization of the question of truth. So we know that for every claim of truth that is made in our times, there is a duplication of claims to falsify the first claim, to proliferate images and seeming evidence, and where anything can be made to look like anything else. This is a particular feature of our contemporary organization of power. Now, earlier we know that increasingly, like earlier we had this model of a state and a civil society, and a family. Okay, and then we get the idea that there is something else in the state which is not actually accessible to the civil society. The state has always secret chambers or arcanum. Even in democracies, there are some things which citizens cannot access, and there is an increasing lack of shame about acknowledging it or even claiming it aggressively. But now you have this additional element. This is not about the arcanum, but about a proliferation of claims to falsify any kind of critical reliance upon truth. So in the context of thinking about performance, this becomes very important. So in contrast to the arcanum, but accompanying it and working alongside it, we have the hall of mirrors, the false ceiling, doctor videos, documents of birth certificates, income certificates, judicial testimonies, which can contradict the age-old confidence that radical ethic is based on the force of speaking truth to power. So reading performance, not as action but as gesture, probably opens up the possibility of visibilizing or allowing us to see this new predicament, this new political predicament, and working with this rather than wishing it away or condemning it from the moral platform of an unsulliable truth from which we rehearse our repertoire of lost gestures. So there is the opening of a new possibility, which is gesture to in its volume. And I think that is a very, very significant contribution of our times. Thank you.